She pointed to her brain and she was like, I feel like there's nothing there anymore.
In 1 year, he totaled 3 cars and he was arrested 3 times.
I told myself, I made a promise to myself a long time ago, when I realized what alcohol was doing to my life, that I'm never gonna drink, I'm never gonna take a sip of that.
From ZMB Media and Jewish Community Services, this is Hooked. Stories of loss, love, and most importantly, hope, as told by recovering drug addicts, family members, and friends. I'm Howard Resnick, Manager of Prevention Education at JCS. In this episode, you'll hear from 2 young women who each experienced growing up with a mother who struggled with alcoholism and a third who lost a number of life partners to addictions. All have volunteered to share their experience with us. They are not clients of Jewish Community Services. In a home where addiction is present, the entire family lives in dysfunction. Emotional and sometimes physical abuse, constant state of worry. It's not just the addict that devotes themselves to changing old patterns, but also loved ones. The children, the parents, the siblings, the spouses, they also have stories to share, obstacles to navigate. I asked each speaker if they would describe what it was like for them when their loved one's addiction was at its worst. What was it like for them, and then what was it like, or what is it like for you? So whoever wants to go first, please.
So for me, I remember a week before my mom passed away, she came into my room and she sat on my bed. And prior to that, for the last couple of weeks, we had been fighting and she had been drinking a lot and we just weren't getting along. And I was very upset with her and dealing with a lot of emotions. And she came into my room, she sat on my bed and she looked at me and she started crying. And she said, I know that you want me to be a better mother. And I wish that I was stronger and could give you everything that you deserve, but I feel like so empty inside. I remember she pointed to her brain and she was like, I feel like there's nothing there anymore. And that was, I think, one of the last sober conversations I had had with her. And I remember in that moment wishing I knew what to say, but then also 4 years later reflecting on that moment and thinking, wow, she was going through so much struggle and self-loathing and really just hurting so much. And I think being further out, I really started to empathize more with that. So that I think was I think that was the rawest I had seen her, which was actually weirdly when she was sober. There's obviously raw moments I saw when she was drunk, but I think that was very powerful because she was sober and raw. And then I think for myself, when it got to its worst, again, I think it was a few weeks before she passed away again, and I remember talking to my dad on the phone and crying hysterically, and all I could think about was, okay, my mom has this illness, and my dad also has a different illness, and here I am at 22 years old, I'm going to spend the rest of my life taking care of both of them. And I don't know how I'm going to achieve any of my dreams. And it was a very overwhelming feeling. And I called my dad and I was crying and I said, I just want it all to end. And that again was a few weeks before she passed away. And it's been interesting kind of going through the grieving process and having to forgive yourself for almost feeling like, oh, I made this happen because I said it out loud. But I do think the more I talk to other people who've experienced it and do my own reflection, I realize that when you're living in it, sometimes it feels like, are there worse things, than death? Sometimes I think you're living in this evil kind of situation to no fault of anyone, but just this, really the struggle and this addiction.
So living in it was really hard.
Yes, and it's impossible to compare to what it's like not living in it, unless you are to leave the situation. But for me, it was to the point where I felt like I was getting to my breaking point, and I was like, how often can I continue to do this and live like this in this home of dysfunction and addiction and mental illness?
I've seen my mom at a few different times when I thought it would be the worst and her turning point or breaking point, whatever you want to call it, where she would sit me down and I could smell the alcohol in her breath, and I would look into her eyes. We'd be very close together. I remember a specific time when we were sitting on her kitchen table and I was across from her, and she just looked at me and started bawling, and you can see the pain and her story in her eyes. They just seemed, I'd never looked at her in that way before, where I saw all of her emotions and her pain. And as much as I knew I was struggling from what she was doing, her addiction, but I saw that she was going through way more than I was with living with the addiction. And she basically started telling me a monologue of how she thinks we're so similar, and how she doesn't want me to end up like her, but she sees a lot of her in me. And it almost sounded like she was planning on leaving, and she just made it sound like this was the end, and with tears streaming down her face, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. And I just had to sit there and nod my head and tell her it was okay, even though I was hurting too.
What were your thoughts? What were you feeling at that kitchen table while you were seeing what you were seeing and hearing what you were hearing?
My initial thought was, I need to, like, is this the last time I'm gonna see her? What is she gonna do to herself after this conversation? But I was also thinking, what can I do to help her? She's been to rehab 10 times at this point, and she's had specialists help her, and I'm just sitting here I think I must have been 12 or 13, and I felt so helpless, and I couldn't understand that pain that she was having, but I also felt my own pain, and I was holding back my tears, and just seeing your mom break down like that is something.
Yeah. For those of us who have grown up in a home where there is substance abuse, there is often a role reversal between child and parent. This can feel particularly overwhelming for the child who has limited emotional and other resources to take care of their parent, no less themselves. So what if you are a significant other to someone with an addiction? The wife, the husband, the girlfriend, or boyfriend? What is the impact on you?
You know, the first one that came to my mind was just Herb, which is like, you know, my boyfriend, and because that really traumatized me when he, you know, overdosed and died. And you know, being in recovery, the two of us used together, and then I got clean. And then for a year and 3 months, I watched his addiction just spiral quickly. I just, you know, in 1 year, he totaled 3 cars, and he was arrested 3 times. And I just remember he kept trying to, you know, like come back and, you know, get to a meeting and try to get some time. And he just kept saying, I don't know why I can't get this. Like, I don't know why I keep doing this over and over again. And all I want to do is just shake him and be like, don't you know what you have to do? It's so simple, you know, and try to be a power example. Like, one of the things for me is that I always, at that point, I tried to be a power of example, and I just wanted to fix. I don't know. All I know is that just one day I just didn't hear from him, you know, and that was on a Friday. And I got a call on Sunday, and we had a conversation, and obviously he had relapsed. And the last words that he said to me was, don't worry, I just have one stop to make on my way home, and you can rest assured that I will be up, you know, and ready to go to work tomorrow morning, you know, at 8 a.m. And And that was the last conversation that I had with him. And then the next day I got a call around 2 o'clock from people in recovery letting me know that they had found his body downtown in a bar and he overdosed and he was gone.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just like, you know, I mean, I knew that day would come.
Right.
I really did, but until it happens, it's like I can't even explain, you know, what that felt like. I mean, I just wanted to get in the car and find him. You know, I wanted to get in the car. I didn't even believe it. Like nobody knew anything. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew where his body was. He had no family here. And then finally, when I was able to make a identification at the morgue on the phone, I had to call his mom and say, you know, he didn't make it.
How did it change you?
I mean, for me, I mean, I miss him, you know, I always think about him, but in some ways you know, I want to say it made me stronger and you know, there were some positives that happened. I just learned from it and it just gave me more reason for me, never to get high again, never to use again, one day at a time. So I did, in a good way, his memory kept me clean. And I was able to take all the pain and everything that was like bottled up inside and start giving back to the community. And that's when I started getting involved in the recovery houses and what can I do to help, because I needed something to do with all the pain.
To try to save the addict from the consequences of their behavior can be really draining, exhausting emotionally and physically. Despite every effort on your part, the addiction seems to always win out, and you get to a point where you just cannot continue.
So I think in high school it definitely started to go really downhill. She lost her job, and then in college kind of struggled to get herself out of bed and just slowly got worse and worse. And so when I got home, even being away from it for a year, because I did have this strong bond with my mom, I describe it as this living and breathing dichotomy of good and evil, our relationship. It's when she was sober and taking her medication for bipolar, she was the best mom I could possibly think of. I mean, she was someone that everyone wanted to be around. You know, she was a captivating storyteller. She had this interesting past. She backpacked through Europe and had me when she was 41 because she wanted to live her life a little before she settled down. She served in the military in her 30s. I mean, she was just such a fascinating person, almost like a character in a book. And then on the flip side of that, when she was drunk or mixed her medication with alcohol, she'd become this very evil version of herself. And I never wanted to be around her. I mean, she became embarrassing and very verbally abusive and emotionally abusive to my father and to me, and I didn't want to be around her. So even being away from her for so long, I came back and I was so excited to see her, you know, and it's kind of like you've said before, of just this, a little bit of a role reversal. You kind of feel like in some ways they're your kid and you are excited to, I don't know, kind of hold them again, as weird as that may sound. And so when I got home, I was so excited, but then actually, the day I got back, my dad and my brother picked me up at the airport, and I remember saying, "Oh, where's Mom?" And they were like, "Oh, she couldn't come." And so they're like, "But you'll see her when you get home." And so I walked in the door and realized when she started talking that she was very, very drunk, which is common for I think both addicts and people with bipolar. Anytime you interrupt their routine, kind of really throws them off. And I think because she wasn't used to having us here. So anyway, walked in and quickly remembered how bad things were and that they've, again, got even worse while I was away. And so one night I was about to leave for a trip and I was packing and she was very, very drunk. And I remember kind of saying something like, "Are you seriously drinking?" And she was drinking liquor, which was very different for her, but that was the only thing in our house at the time. She was a big wine drinker, which made her a classy drunk, she said. So she was drinking liquor, and I was like, what are you doing? And then my brother and my dad were kind of like, just ignore it. It's not worth creating this big fight. So we kind of just did our own thing, and then everyone went to bed. But I was packing, and I kind of heard her fall out of her bed. And so I was very upset, but frustrated, and I was like, okay. So I went upstairs, and tried to pick her up. At that point, she was overweight, and I was just like, what are you doing? Like, I can't keep saving you over and over, because at that point it was rehab and emergency rooms and police coming to the house because loud disturbances, and I was just, again, so tired of it. So I tried to turn her over on her side because I can't pick her up, because I didn't want her to, harm herself. And I remember having this moment where I was like, okay, what are my options? Like, my flight's at 5 a.m. Then, for this trip I've taken my mom to the emergency room my whole life. Again, like 22 years. My dad's asleep. My brother's asleep. Like, what, do I call the ambulance for the millionth time, whatever? And then have her get mad that we're spending money on ambulance bills, this whole mess. Or do I, she's going to wake up tomorrow hungover and apologize and whatever. We'll do it again and again. And so I kind of made a choice in that moment. I was like, I'm going to bed. I'll see you tomorrow. And then I woke up, I think like 3 hours later. And I remember when I woke up, I just, without even going in my mom's room, I was just like, oh shit, something feels like something really bad just happened. And then I remember going to the bathroom first because I didn't want to go into her room, because it was, obviously I don't know, but I felt like just an energy or something. And then I walked into her room and found her on the floor, and I remember just the image of her face blue. And I was just like, just completely in shock. And then I, went to get my dad, who was sleeping down in the basement, and woke up my brother, and then it was just all happened so quickly. But it was one of those things, I think, going back to what I said in the beginning, of almost wishing it would all end. And then it was, it was like, okay, well, now it's done. Mm-hmm. It's over. And I remember thinking, like, oh, for lack of better terms, oh, fuck. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to see what it's like when it's over. And then I know, immediately with the grief, at first it was like, oh, this isn't better. Like, no. I'm going to undo this. Let's rewind this. I take it all back, as if, like I had caused this by wishing it. And I recently heard someone describe it as, it's like you're trying to crack this code when you lose someone, lose anyone from anything, but especially I think a mother-daughter bond is very, very sacred and special. And it was like you're trying to, once the person passes away, it's like, okay, well, if I can just do this, or, bring their memory with this way. And it's almost like, even though it's not possible, you're constantly trying to like find the numbers to unlock the combination to reverse this terrible thing, and then they'll be back. And again, on an intellectual level, it's not happening, but your heart and your soul want it. Yeah. And I remember saying that even the first couple of years of grief, just, I love, my life is full of so many wonderful things and people. But if someone said, hey, would you turn it all in to have your mom back? And I was like, yep, take it all, bring her back, and that's something I think about a lot, because grief is intense, and just learning to live without that person. That, again, especially as a mother, I always think of it like at one point in your life with a mom, a biological mom, at one point when you were in her room, you were two souls sharing the same body. You were literally a part of one being. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself, I think,
very profound.
Yes, that connection. And so when she died, I felt that half of me died with her.
While Piper was talking, anything come up for you? Your mom is still alive? Mm-hmm. And any thoughts or feelings come up for you, or Debbie, for you?
Well, I actually had a conversation with my brother recently, where I was just having a really hard night. I just was breaking down because I had a relapse of emotions, and I was fine, and then one thing happened, and then I went down memory lane, and everything hit me, and I had no one to go to but my brother, and he was in his room next to mine, and I went in, and we just started talking about everything, because I had actually never heard his side of the story, because that's not how our relationship was. My mom was a very like secretive alcoholic. We never saw the alcohol in our house, but she would come home drunk. And so we just started talking about all the things that had happened to us. And at the end of the conversation, he said, honestly, I'm surprised she's not gone. I'm shocked she's still with us. And if she keeps this up, she only has a few years more, or whether it's her liver or she overdoses with alcohol.
So it's certainly something you've been thinking. It's back.
Yeah, and
it's in the back of your mind.
That definitely stuck, because I never thought about it like that. But yeah.
Anything for you, Debbie?
Yeah, and just listening to you, I guess it really just brought me back to my son's father, and how my son was 4 at the time, right before we split up, but you know, his drinking had gotten to the point where it was, you know, morning, noon, and night, and it was just really bad between the two of us in the relationship. And then, you know, on top of that, you know, you have this 4-year-old little boy who's watching, you know, his family literally be torn apart. And, you know, it was just the same thing to sit back and to watch the drinking progress to the point that it did. And I just remember that I was planning on leaving with my son. And I just remember I said to him, because he knew it, you know, he kept saying, I have a problem, I'm going to stop. And I remember saying, you know, just giving him, I guess you call it an ultimatum, but I'm like, look, here's the situation. He's like, I want to get help. I'm like, fine, you need to go to rehab. You need to go to rehab if you want to stop and you want to save your family. But, you know, more so than anything, that you want to stop. And I just remember, I said, you need to let me know what your decision is later, you know. And then I had gone back to him, and, you know, he sat me down and he's like, well, I thought about everything you said, right? And the way I look at it is, you know, I really have 3 options. One, I can go to rehab, but then, you know, there's an extra expense because of the whatever the insurance doesn't cover, and just, you know, blah, blah, blah. Number 2, I could go to a detox for 7 days this time. I've never done that. I could do that, detox, and then come back and just stop. And number 3, I can do what I did before, but do it like seriously this time, and go to this doctor and get some Librium and do it myself. So I'm waiting, you know, I'm thinking, okay, you know, your wife and your son are getting ready to move out, and you presented me what you think your 3 options are. And he said, so I think I'm just going to try this Librium thing again, you know. And I just remember I was like, what? You know, like I mean, that's not going to work. And I was just devastated, because it was kind of like, you know, number 1, you had an opportunity to save your life, and you're getting ready to lose your son and your wife, right? And the best option you can pick is the worst of the 3, you know? And I did move out. We did leave, you know? And I guess it just brought me back, because my son's father did die a couple years ago, but it spiraled quickly after that, and you know, the drinking was just out of control, and, you know, to the point where it did destroy his liver and his kidneys, and, you know, to watch all that. But I just remember, like, for whatever reason, you know, him having that decision and the choice he made, and how much it just, I mean, it just hurt, you know. It's just one of those other issues. It's just kind of like, we don't matter enough.
Right. If the addict, alcoholic would really care about us,
right,
then of course they would stop.
Right.
Can't they see the damage being done?
Right.
How did you guys stay sane, or how do you keep sane? What have been some ways that you've found yourself using to cope? Maybe some ways that are really healthy, and maybe some ways not healthy.
I always felt like my mom sort of had these two versions of herself. I too had two versions of myself, and I think a big part of that for me was that I was in this upper middle class upbringing, and I went to this all-girls prep school where obviously addiction is present, but it's really like, let's not talk about it. Or so I felt. And I know one of my friends says there's different types of poverty, and there's poverty as we think of it as not having a lot of money, not having a roof over your head, not having access to healthcare and education and whatnot. And then there's a poverty in these upper middle class to upper class families where people are really struggling in similar areas, but she called it poverty of the soul. And it's like, oh, well, no, they have nice houses and they have nice cars and they go on nice vacations. They're good. And I know we know that it's not real. But I think I felt because I was in that environment that I couldn't share that with anyone. And so I remember when things got really bad, honestly, ever since I was probably 4 years old, I remember my earliest memories. My mom, when she would get emotionally and verbally abusive, never physically, but just words are powerful. My dad would actually take my brother and I out of the house and take us to a cheap motel in the middle of the night. And I remember that when I was little, all the way up to high school. And I remember being dropped off at this prep school, and my dad was like, get through your day. Like, I love you. Good luck with everything. And I'd walk through the doors, and it was almost like as I was walking, it was like, okay, don't, kind of like let go of what just happened, and then open the door into this ritzy, nice school. And, oh, who watched Gossip Girl last night? And, okay, yeah, I saw it. Yeah, like everything was great.
But really, you had spent the night on the run, so to speak, in a
motel, right? And so I felt like for me, in order to stay sane almost, because I've done a lot of thinking about this recently, actually, is, oh God, was that terrible that I put on this facade of, because so many of my friends now that I have opened up, or once my mom passed away, they found out, they were like, that what was going on? Because they're like, wait, you were class president and you did sports and you were so active and friendly and happy. And the more people I meet that I think have struggled with addiction themselves, or family members with addiction, they are these people so often that put on this happy face and seem like just they look for the joy in different things. And so anyway, I think while I definitely was hiding part of it, which never feels truly authentic, at the same time, I think it was a way for me to protect myself and to cope and to feel comfortable and be able to put myself in that environment and excel, and not let the addiction kind of take over and prevent me from doing the things that I wanted to do. So
you bring out an excellent point. Just like the addict alcoholic needs to be juggling constantly two different personalities until sort of the very end. Also, if you really love that alcoholic for a long time, you end up juggling two personas.
yes.
Thank you for sharing that. How do you kind of keep your sanity when sometimes it's pretty hard to do that at home?
When I was younger, I never knew my mom as an alcoholic. I knew her as my mom who was allergic to wine. And so I don't remember the turning point when it hit me that she has a problem. Mommy camp wasn't mommy camp, it was rehab. And I think up until that point, when I did realize that, okay, this is not all of my other friends, what they go home to, it was denial that kept me sane.
Yes.
I lived a very middle upper class, same as you, in the private school. I've grown up at my private school. It's always been my home away from home, where, you know, I expect that it's, I don't know, I don't look at my friends as, or my environment as having these problems around them. It's just me. And recently I found a lot of, I don't know.
Other people, other kids are experiencing.
Yeah, but I've also, like that, but I've also found a lot of comfort, I guess, in sharing my story. And because I recently did that through my speech this year. And it was a very liberating experience, just having it out there, and then people coming up to me after and saying, well, that's similar to what is happening in my family. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's not just me, and I'm not alone in this. But the other aspect of it is seeing addiction within my friends and the parties that I go to, and kind of my method of coping and staying sane is trying to not, I guess, kind of control what's going on, and preaching to my friends almost like, this is real life. What you're doing now could very easily affect you in the future. And my mom is an example of that. My story is an example of that. But yeah, I kind of keep to myself with my thoughts. My head's always running on memories from things my mom did. And yeah, I think my best way to stay sane is sharing it, just letting it out, because I had held it all in for so long, all my life pretty much, and now just realizing that it's not as taboo as, or it doesn't need to be so socially unacceptable. It needs to be shared.
Healthy, unhealthy ways that you notice you try to cope or have coped?
Well, definitely, I've had both. You know, one of the things I think, no matter what I try to do, is like, you know, obviously find these outlets to hide in, these safe places to go, to just not deal with what's going on, you know. And that sometimes for me, you know, depending on what part of my life we're talking about, when I was going through all this, you know, I would resort to alcohol and drugs, you know, to medicate me. And, you know, but when that wasn't in my life, I would, you know, there was gambling. I was a workaholic. And, you know, so a lot of, when all the turmoil was going on in my life, like, I found my salvation through work. And that had become my life. So there was a lot of just hiding out there, so that I wouldn't have to really deal with what was going on at home. And then, you know, then when I got home, just depending on the circumstances, I would find something to medicate, you know. It could be shopping, it could be spending money, it could be just, you know, those were the main ones, and gambling and just self-destructive behaviors and things to just get outside of myself. You know, I had a pattern of, and again, just being in recovery and somebody that was an addict and an alcoholic, of always getting in a relationship with somebody that was worse than me. So, you know, it always put me in that role where I'm the victim. You know, I'm the victim, and you know, the other person always has the problem. And then, you know, in recovery, obviously, it was much easier to cope with some of this by going to Al-Anon, or even just going to some of my regular meetings, and you know, just applying the steps, applying the tools that recovery gives you to deal with stuff like this. And, you know, the one message that I hear over and over again is, you know, you got to keep the focus on yourself. You got to keep the focus on yourself. And then once the secret was out,
a certain liberation, like you were talking.
There was like immediate relief. You know, like so much of that, like control and all the work that's into trying to keep everything looking normal, like it's gone. If anything, it leaves a void. It leaves a void.
You're
it really
unemployed
does.
a little bit. Yeah.
It does. Like I have nobody to fix. I have nothing. I have no drama. Like what am I gonna do now?
I think
I gotta create some drama, of course. But that's where, for me, you know, I just feel blessed that I have tools that when other people's disease affect my life, I now know how to start utilizing them
The tools
to help me get through a lot of this.
We're only as sick as our secrets, but once we share our secret, there's such a sense of relief. Finally, you don't have to carry this secret, this shame, this fear of being found out, which has weighed you down and kept you from doing the things you know you needed to do to get healthy. At this point, I asked our group, now that you've shared this secret, what have you noticed?
As far as my own choices, I think it was staying active and finding things I was passionate about. And it was, okay, when you're young, I mean, there's only so much you can do when you're in a household as a child and one of your parents is an addict. I mean, again, I was lucky that they weren't both. But yeah, you can't get up, you can't pack your bags and leave, you know, until, you know, you're a little bit older so you can kind of fend for yourself. But as a 4-year-old, you're not going to pack your little suitcase. And so I think just kind of just finding, okay, what lights me up? What brings me joy? And as Maddie actually said before, her mom looking at her saying, I see all of the wonderful qualities that I have that, you know, that you bring out. And that's such a wonderful thing. And I think the same thing with my mom of, I definitely inherited some of the bad things as well that I'm working through, but the good things, I think I tried to bring those to life, maybe as a way, because I knew that she was struggling to do so.
Just like the addict themselves benefits from being in recovery, so do those of us who care or continue to love an addict. We too are healing by sharing our stories, learning and unlearning from our experiences. Thanks for listening to this podcast. We invite you to listen to the other episodes in the series. If you or someone you love is battling addiction, you're not alone. There are resources that can help. Visit our website, ifiknew.org. Click on the Get Help tab for listings of local Baltimore resources, as well as leading national ones. These podcasts are brought to you by Jewish Community Services in Baltimore, an agency of the Associated. We are grateful for their support as well as the generosity of other funders who make JCS prevention education programming possible.